Okay, this is the third part of our section, and we're going to talk a little bit about a little more about torture, a little more about how and why it's done, or how it's justified at least. So one of the kind of classic philosophical questions is, when is torture justified, right? And the kind of classic scenario that people dream up to try to say, well, but what if, is what if we know we've caught a person, they're under arrest, we know they've planted a bomb in a crowded place that's set to go off at some point. Would it be okay to torture them to find out where that bomb is so we can save those lives? Now, there are lots of different philosophers and schools of philosophy that answer this question in very different ways. I'm only going to talk about a very small number of them. The most obvious being moralism versus causalism. So if you go back to one of our earlier sections, we talked about kind of moralism. Essentially, I'm probably oversimplifying this, but simplifying this definitely. Moralism basically says acts are either good or bad in themselves, right? And causalism says, no, it's not the act that's good or bad, it's the outcome that's either good or bad. So a moralist would look at torture and say, acts are either good or bad in themselves. Torture is one of those bad things, so torture is bad. Like, you can't, no matter what you get out of the torture is still wrong. The torture is still evil. Whereas a causalist would say, look, if we torture one guy in order to save, 100 lives or whatever, then torture can be a good thing. Now, there are lots of other kind of philosophical arguments about that kind of, we need to know where this bomb is so we can save lives. Some philosophers and philosophical schools of thought would say, look, you can't know that torture will get you the information you seek. B, you can't know that you won't be able to find the bomb without the torture. So torturing him is assuming that A, he'll give you the information, and B, you couldn't get that information in any other way, both of which are bad assumptions. But for the most part, philosophy comes down on torture is either always wrong or it's almost always wrong, but we could theoretically dream up this hypothetical scenario where it might be justified. But it's fairly universally condemned. Okay? Now, who commits torture? Because the person doing the torturing is a human being. What kind of human being is able to do that? What kind of human being rapes a prisoner? What kind of human being, puts electricity on somebody's genitals? What kind of human being, burns people and stretches people to the point of broken limbs? And the answer is a lot more complicated than you'd think. But there have been some kind of famous pieces of research that have at least attempted to determine why that is, right? So after World War II, we had these trials. The whole world was shocked at what the Nazis had done and these concentration camps, and so many people said, well, I could never do that. I mean, that could never happen here, because here, we have morality and we would never do all these horrible things to these innocent people, and I can't believe that they just went along with that. And all of these people that had been caught after the war, the concentration camp guards and these people doing all these horrible things, kind of kept saying, well, we were ordered to. We were just following orders. And all the other, the Allies were all kind of saying, well, it doesn't matter. You don't follow evil orders like that. Um, but this guy Milgram gets this idea that, look, I'm going to actually test this. Could just normal, everyday American people ever become like those Nazi concentration camp guards just because they were following orders? And he set up this experiment. And it's a famous, famous experiment. Essentially, he got a group of volunteers. And you were assigned as a volunteer as either a teacher or a learner. If you were the teacher, you would sit at this desk with a bunch of like knobs and buttons and stuff. If you were the learner, you would sit in an adjoining room with a bunch of electrical kind of stuff hooked up to you. Then the teacher would ask some questions. And if the learner got it right, nothing happened. But if the learner got the answer wrong, the teacher would hit a button and it would give that person, the learner, a shock, an electric shock. And the teacher got given a little electric shock on like power level 1 or 2 or whatever, just so they could feel what it felt like. And then the teacher was told to commence this program. And every time the learner got one wrong, they would go up a level in intensity. And the joke was, or what they didn't tell everybody was, all of the volunteers were teachers. The learner was an actor. The learner was in on it. The learner wasn't actually getting shocked. Okay? The learner was working for the researchers, pretending to be shocked. But the teacher didn't know that. The teacher, all of these people who were assigned to be the teacher didn't know. They really believed that they were shocking this person with electricity. So the learner, in a lot of cases, would start screaming in pain, would say, I don't want to do this anymore, would pass out, had all these reactions. And the teacher, the experiment was designed to see how far the teacher would go before they kind of stopped, before they said, look, I'm not doing this. We're torturing this poor guy. And what they found was, in the vast majority of cases, a disturbing number of cases, people went all the way up to the full 10 thing. And if they expressed any, like, hey, should we check on him? Hey, is this right? Hey, should I maybe not be? A person in a white lab coat with a clipboard would just say, continue, please continue, please continue, right? And they would continue. Because there was a guy with a white lab coat and a clipboard telling them to keep going, they kept going in the vast majority of cases. A second piece of research was the Stanford prison experiment, which was back in the early 70s. This guy Zimbardo was a psychologist at Stanford University in California, and he got a whole bunch of volunteers, college students, all men, all between the ages of like 19, 22, that kind of age range. And he randomly assigned all the people to be either prisoners or guards. And then he set up this situation where he was the warden. There was in the basement of one of the buildings was this set up prison, which you can see the picture here, where they had, I think, 4 cells, a guard room. The guards had uniforms, the prisoners had uniforms, and Zimbardo just kind of told these students, like, act like this is a real prison. This is, you're the guards, you're the prisoners, here's the schedule of activities, like this is, let's do this. And essentially the prisoners became prisonized very quickly and kind of embraced that role of prisoner, and the guards became really sadistic really quickly. They started doing really horrible, horrible things. And remember, they had been randomly assigned to either prisoner or guard, so it's not like they took the people who were naturally more kind of submissive and made them prisoners and took the people who were naturally more sadistic and made them guards. They were randomly assigned. But the guards embraced their role and became sadistic, and the prisoners, most of them, embraced their role and became kind of prisonized. Now, both of these experiments have been criticized. They've attempted to replicate the Milgram experiments. and have gotten kind of mixed results. The Zimbardo experiments, they had to be shut down early because of ethical concerns. So they're both, Zimbardo especially is an example of really bad research, but there is some takeaways from these, even acknowledging the limits of the research and the kind of negatives of the research. Essentially what they've found, what these two experiments and other experiments have found, is that in a lot of cases, authority defines meaning. So essentially, yes, as a human being, there is a very high chance that even you, who believes that they would never do something like that, would do something like that if an authority in a position of power that who's someone whose authority you respect, somebody in a position of power that you acknowledge, tells you to do something, there's a very good chance that you would do it too. And that's scary. That makes people look at themselves like, wow, I could do something like that? Really? Him? Really? But it's lots of research has shown that it is not uncommon for that to happen. Exactly how common, is kind of depends on who you talk to and what you think of these experiments and others like them. But it's definitely not nearly as uncommon as we'd hope it would be. But part of this process of taking a normal person who had never hurt another soul, is not only the authority, not only the make them just follow orders, but it's also the dehumanization of the victims, right? The Nazis spent decades vilifying Jewish people before they ever opened the first concentration camp. They had to dehumanize them. They had to make the normal German citizen believe that they are less than, they're other, they're different, right? That dehumanization process. And that dehumanization process is actually disturbingly common when you look around even the modern world. I mean, usually it doesn't end up with, death camps and Zyklon B showers, thankfully. But that dehumanization process is disturbingly common. Take a look around your country, your time, look at other countries. That dehumanization process continues. Here in the United States, right now, as I'm recording this in 2019, this dehumanization process is happening against people coming from Mexico and Guatemala and Honduras and other Latin American countries trying to come to the United States. This dehumanization process is absolutely happening against those people. They're being called all kinds of horrible names. The president, our current president, when he was a candidate, has said many dehumanizing things about people coming from these other countries. And the excuse is always that, oh, well, if they do it legally, we're fine with it. But that's usually not the case, because what we find is that the people who are coming here legally are treated the exact same way, and with the exact same dehumanization and the exact same putting them in detention camps. What a person in the House of Representatives kind of controversially and famously called concentration camps here in the United States. Even the people who are doing the right thing and coming here legally are getting treated in that same dehumanizing way. The people doing the dehumanizing are not making a distinction at all in practice between those coming here legally and those coming here illegally. So this turning people into other, this turning people into less than, turning them into not us. That process is disturbingly common, and that's how these kinds of things start, right? It doesn't always end up with torture, but that's always how they start, because you can't have, especially large scale, one group torturing and doing all these horrible things to another group without first dehumanizing that group and making the dominant group believe that the other group is somehow undeserving of human rights and respect, and they do deserve humiliation and pain and torture and all these horrible things. So the last thing we're going to talk about is kind of medical personnel involved in torture. Now, every medical doctor and even some non-doctor medical people have to take what's called the Hippocratic Oath. And I don't know it word for word. I'm not even going to try to recite it. But it's essentially do no harm, right? Your job is to help people. Your job is to heal. Your job is to make people better. It's not to hurt people or torture people or kill people. But every medical association on the planet basically has come out against torture, right? The American Medical Association, the medical associations of other countries, the Association of all of these different medical groups, all of these official organizations that represent medical people have all come out against torture. But people who have been tortured around the world, 20% of them say that there was a doctor present while they were being tortured. How? If every doctor has to take this Hippocratic Oath to not hurt people, if every medical association says torture is wrong, medical people should not participate in torture, how can 20% of all the different people being tortured have a doctor present? Once again, it's that rationalization. It's governments going to doctors and saying, look, I know you don't want to torture people, but national security is at stake. It's that dehumanization process that we talked about on the last slide. It's that all those things combine to allow these medical personnel to rationalize helping with this process. Sometimes it's, well, we need to do this to save lives. Well, we need to do this because of national security. Well, I'm not the one actually hurting him. I'm just there, in case something goes wrong, right? There are these justifications and rationalizations that these people are able to make in order to justify to themselves helping with this torture process. Okay? Oh, I forgot. There's one more thing we're going to talk about. I thought that was the last slide, but it's not. Victims of torture. Kind of what happens afterwards. Obviously, there's physical scars. There's physical reminders. Sometimes it's scars. Sometimes it's permanent loss of appendages, fingers, arms, legs. Sometimes it's muscle or skeletal damage, right? You may never walk correctly again. Even though you have both legs, you might never walk correctly. So the physical is obviously a very, very big result of being a victim of torture, but it doesn't stop there. There's also the psychological and the emotional, what it does to your head. One of the bigger things is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD can be caused by a lot of things, but it's essentially traumatic experiences cause future psychological issues. So one of the more common ways we see it in the United States is with combat soldiers. Soldiers who were in combat, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, they come home and they suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, where their brains are having trouble processing what happened to them, what they did, and what other things were done to them, and they have all kinds of other it comes out in many different ways. Okay, some of the ways that these psychological and emotional problems can come out, either caused by PTSD or just by themselves, are depression. Just that. And as someone who knows the difference between being sad and being depressed, there is a very big difference. Depression is very different than just, kind of being bummed or being sad. Depression is kind of an entire body inability to function. Okay, nightmares obviously are a very common thing with PTSD, in general, or torture specifically. Personality changes. Lots of people find that they kind of, because the purpose of torture is destruction of the self, destruction of the personness, a lot of times they can't get that back. They don't, that's gone after the torture. They can't get back who they were because that was systematically taken away from them via torture. So their personality changes. They become more short-tempered. They become quieter. They become, lots of different ways they can change. And then, of course, there's guilt. What did I do to deserve it? There's often survivor's guilt, i.e., why did I live through that when so many other people didn't? And then there's shame, right? Other people know about what happened to me, all these horrible, humiliating things that were done to me, that can cause huge, horrible feelings of shame. Because even if nobody else knows about it, you still know about it. You still know what was done to you. And that generates lots of different, psychological and emotional problems. But that is the end of our chapter on torture. So I will see you for the next section.